Japan Up Close.
So the palm has had a really significant impact on Japan-Pacific Islands relations. It was started in 1997 at a time when the US and others were really turning away from the region. So this was the first recurring summit between the Pacific Island countries as a group and a major power. Now that Japan chose to move closer together, and especially with the Japanese emperor even hosting a reception during the first summit, really showed that Japan wanted to be seen as a committed leading partner to the region. And since that time, I think Japan has really demonstrated that. The Palm has served as an important forum for the region's leaders to engage directly with the Japanese government. It's facilitated cooperation on political and economic issues. It's provided a space to address contentious issues, such as the current controversy involving the release of water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Of course, like any good summit, it's also been an opportunity for Japan to announce new aid commitments and activities. So, over the past 3 decades that the Palms existed, it's really grown to become a core part of Japan's regional engagement. On the other side of the equation, the Pacific Islands also really view the Palm as an important forum. Just last week, Mark Brown, the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands and the current chair of the Pacific Islands Forum, explained the significance from his point of view. He said, quote, "The Palm has enabled us to find meaningful ways to work towards our common aspirations for peace, harmony, security, social inclusion, and prosperity." And the Pacific Islands Forum themselves said, quote, "The Palm process presents an invaluable opportunity for the Pacific and Japan to discuss shared concerns and priorities in a spirit of genuine partnership and friendship." So I would say overall, it has really benefited both sides, and both sides see it as a really important forum going forwards. So Japan's role is really that of originator and convener. It created the Palm in 1997 and has hosted it every 3 years. Japan's role continues to be that leading player. I think what's really important, though, is what should Japan's role be today in the Palm? And for that, I think Japan's role should be that of a listener and responder. It should really use the Palm as an opportunity to listen to the Pacific Island leaders, hear about their priorities and needs, and then engage with the Pacific Islands from that point. It's very important to respond to what the Pacific Islands want rather than just what Japan thinks they need. But I can't speak as much to Japan's engagement with other parts of the world. So let me reverse the question and actually say, what are the lessons that Japan can learn from its engagement with the Pacific Islands that can then be applied to other developing countries? And here, I think that the biggest lesson is the importance of listening and responding to the identified needs of the developing country or the region, instead of just showing up and saying, this is what we think you need and what it is that we're giving you. This is something that other countries, including the US and Australia, have been guilty of. It's not just a problem with the executive branch, but also one with the legislative branch, because oftentimes in legislative systems, money will be appropriated for specific purposes. And those specific purposes just may not have anything to do with the country or the region to which the money is going. So it's really important that Japan and its development partners listen to what the countries need and are able to provide aid in response to those needs. Now, equally as important here is the importance of providing aid in a timely manner. Developing countries like those in the Pacific Islands region, they have critical needs. They need bridges, they need roads, they need schools, they need power plants, they need power grids, and they can't wait for the years that it takes a lot of times in places like Japan and the US for these projects to go from initially putting out a proposal through the bidding process, through all of the environmental reviews and the administrative reviews, to the funding and actually getting it on the ground. Equally, they can't always actually handle all of that bureaucratic process because they just don't have the domestic capacity. So I think it's really important that Japan take away from this the importance of approaching this region and other similar regions in a way that makes sense, in a way that the region can actually handle. So eliminating the bureaucratic hurdles where they can be eliminated, speeding up the delivery of assistance where it can be sped up, and making sure that what's needed to be done can be done in a quick, efficient, but still a completely appropriate manner. Japan might want to consider creating special rules for countries that match certain criteria, such as those in the Pacific Islands, that would enable aid to be developed more expeditiously and without all of the normal hurdles. Of course, it's still important to have all of the reviews to make sure money is accounted for and to make sure that projects are appropriately provided. And so historically, Japan's assistance in the security sector has really been provided more through its Coast Guard and private foundations like the Sasakawa Foundation. And Sasakawa in particular has helped Pacific Islands protect their maritime exclusive economic zones with maritime surveillance and policing capacities. They've donated patrol boats to certain islands, provided other training capabilities. So in 2021, Japan and the Pacific Islands held the first defense dialogue. The second dialogue, which was held this past March, was where the Japanese defense minister announced the cooperation concept for united security efforts in the Pacific Islands region. Now, this concept has 5 points. One is respecting centrality, unity, and ownership of Pacific Island countries. Two, strengthening equal, mutually beneficial, and supportive relationships. Three, supporting collaboration between Pacific Island countries and Japan and ASEAN. Four, strengthening coordination between the existing defense dialogue and the South Pacific Defense Ministers meeting. And finally, strengthening coordination between the defense dialogue and the Palm itself. The Japanese Defense Ministry also recently announced that it's going to be expanding the scope of its aid to the region to include support for police and other security personnel, in addition to promoting high-level meetings, goodwill dispatches of vessels and aircraft, and to accept Pacific Islanders to study at the National Defense Academy. And I can tell you my own experience when I was in Palau for 2 years is we had the Japanese Self-Defense Force actually come on one of these goodwill visits. The various sailors came ashore, engaged in local activities. There were donations of equipment and other items, all part of a great display of soft power from Japan. Japan, I think, can also really help the Pacific Island countries monitor their very large exclusive economic zones with satellite data and patrol boats. Remember that we're talking about islands which are as small as 10 or 20,000 people, but that control hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of maritime territory. And they simply don't have the resources in order to patrol this. And so Japan can help by providing data, providing surveillance, providing patrol boats as well. And this is another great area where it could cooperate with like-minded partners such as the US and Australia. Finally, Japan and the Pacific Islands can speak more strongly, as they are doing in the statement that's supposed to be released at this week's Palm meeting, about opposing the changing of the status quo through the use of force in the region. Now, that really reads directly into the reason Japan is focusing on security in the region. And that's really clear. There's two reasons. The first is that the Pacific region is an important source for raw materials and also through which a significant amount of Japanese imports and exports travel. Keeping the region open and free and secure is really very important to the Japanese economy. And second, of course, is China. The Chinese government has been working to expand its security presence in the region, most notably with the security agreement it signed with the Solomon Islands in 2022. The terms of that agreement are still secret, and it led to a lot of concern in Tokyo and Washington, D.C. and Canberra about Chinese presence in the region. If China is able to place its security forces in the Pacific Islands, that exposes Japan's south side and would force a realignment of Japan's current defense posture. So there's a very real security concern that Japan has about China's increased presence in the region and increased use or attempted use of security forces in the region. Japan has restructured its engagement in recent years to match the priority areas that were identified in the Pacific Island Forum's 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. Among these priority areas are climate change, as well as economic development, technology and connectivity, and people-centered development. Now, throughout the region, Japan has and is continuing to provide significant financial and technical support on a variety of projects in a variety of sectors, sometimes acting bilaterally and sometimes acting multilaterally. So just to offer a couple of examples, in 2022, Japan provided a medical ship to the Marshall Islands, which is an archipelagic nation that requires ships in order to get to island to island to island. It's also currently working with the US and Australia to help lay a new 1,400-mile undersea fiber optic cable that will support people in Kiribati, Nauru, and the Federated States of Micronesia. In February of last year, Japan and the UNDP launched a 2-year, $36.8 million project to help Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Timor-Leste, and Vanuatu reduce their reliance on fossil fuels, drive sustainable economic growth, and deal with the impacts of climate change. The very next month, Japan and UNICEF signed a $9 million partnership to strengthen digital health systems in Fiji, Kiribati, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. Japan has also been working with Palau, Vanuatu, and Fiji to reinforce capabilities and capacities for broader control of their borders through use of digitalization. And in Samoa, Japan is supporting the improvement of facilities at the National University of Samoa's Faculty of Health Science, a critical provider of health services in that country. Finally, in Palau, JICA, the Japanese Overseas Development Agency, is helping to set up a public bus system. And again, from my experience, I can tell you that JICA is involved in a host of activities in Palau and elsewhere. There's really many more examples that could be offered, but I think the simple point is really that Japan has a robust engagement with the entire region in a variety of sectors. It has developed this over a number of years, and every indication is that it plans to continue to develop this even further. Opportunities for cooperation exist not because Japan is an island like the Pacific Island countries, but because it's a major developed economy that imports goods and also can provide development assistance. I think the biggest challenge right now facing Japan is its decision to release the contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. It really risks rupturing Japan's relations with many of the Pacific Islands who are extremely concerned whenever anything nuclear is related. It really risks undoing decades of goodwill that Japan has built up. Japan has done a pretty good job of being very transparent, of engaging these countries, explaining what it's doing. It's gotten IAEA assurance that what it's doing is safe. It really needs to continue to do this and work hard to make sure that its decision does not cause problems going forwards. Now, more specifically in the maritime sector on opportunities, the threats come from, I think, 3 places. First is climate change. Not just climate change, but warming ocean temperatures, which are causing fish stocks and other marine life to physically move where they are living, as well as causing coral bleaching and a host of other issues. There's also illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing, and of course, China, which we've already spoken about. I think Japan can absolutely help the Pacific Islands deal with these challenges, from enhancing maritime surveillance capabilities to developing aquaculture capabilities and thereby enhancing food security within the countries. In doing so, though, I would really recommend that Japan find ways to work with its like-minded partners, such as Australia, the US, and even Taiwan. And this is an important point that extends beyond the maritime sector. And again, it's something that I alluded to earlier. The donors in this region need to be really careful about not overwhelming small governments. A lot of times government offices may be staffed with just a few people. And if they have to spend all of their time meeting with many different foreign delegations, they can't get any work done. They can't handle the bureaucratic issues that, the paperwork, the forms, the approvals, all of that. So, one thing that I think Japan and all of its like-minded partners need to do a better job of is finding ways to collaborate on projects, perhaps to demarcate projects and each country take a different part of it, but finding ways to do fewer large projects that impose a smaller bureaucratic burden on these countries rather than many small projects that the countries just physically can't handle. You know, one final point on this is that the U.S. launched the Partners in the Blue Pacific a couple of years ago now, and that really could be a good forum for providing this type of cooperation and coordination. Well, Japan clearly wants to continue building its relationships across the Pacific, and the Pacific Islands are welcoming of Japan's assistance as they do anyone's assistance. The Pacific Islands are very proud of their position that we are a friend to everyone, an enemy to no one. And so any country that wants to work with them collaboratively, they will welcome. There are going to be a lot of challenges, some of which Japan can control and some of which Japan can't control. Japan itself has serious economic and demographic challenges that are going to impact its ability to provide overseas development assistance. Given limited resources, I would recommend Japan continue to focus on what it has been doing really well, where it's already developed a lot of strength, and where it has comparative advantages, rather than necessarily trying to expand into new areas. If the US or Australia or others are already providing work and assistance in a certain area, unless Japan has something new to add, it doesn't make sense for Japan to do it just to say that it's doing it. I'd also again raise the issue of the Fukushima water that's currently being released. Japan needs to continue to work very hard to make sure that the Pacific Islands accept to the best that they can to accept Japan's decision, to understand that the water being released has been deemed to be safe, no harm is going to be done, and that if any indication of any problem arises, Japan is going to stop and fix the problem. Japan just needs to continue to be transparent on this issue. Now, those are the things that Japan can control. Outside of Japan's control, of course, I think most significantly is the competition between the US and China in the region. And there's no question here that Japan shares the same goals, values, and interests as the US does. But I would say that Japan will be best served if it avoids any situation in which it forces the Pacific Islands to choose us or them. And this goes for the US, this goes for Australia, and anyone else that's trying to be involved in the region. The Pacific Islanders have made it very clear. They do not want to have to choose between one side or the other. So as long as Japan steers clear of that and says, we will work with anyone, we know the Pacific Islanders will welcome anyone. And if you have something to contribute, please come to the table and contribute. I think that's what Japan needs to do. If it does otherwise, then it risks rupturing some of the goodwill that it has built up over time. So it really shouldn't do that. Overall, in sum, I would say that Japan just needs to continue listening and being responsive to the Pacific Islands, engage with the 2050 strategy that the Pacific Islands Forum has put out, and be willing to work with anyone that is willing to join them in helping the Pacific Islands with the needs that they have identified.
Japan Up Close.